Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about logical fallacies, or how not to use data. So an overview of what we're going to go over is we get a lot of data, whether it's through testing or whether we're looking at our audience through analytics or something like that, or whether it's just discussions amongst the team. But how do we use that data and how do we use it effectively? And how do we avoid logical fallacies? Because we want to avoid logical fallacies. But first, what is a logical fallacy? It's an error in logic. I mean, simple enough. It just means that you've made an incorrect conclusion based on some fallacy. There are many common patterns in logical fallacies, though, that reappear often enough that we've given them names and we've given them labels. So we're going to cover those today and talk about each one and what the definition of it is, some examples of it, and then hopefully how to avoid it or at least call people out when you see it, because that's something I want you to encourage. Is when you see a logical fallacy being used, especially amongst other students, but really with anyone in the world, call them out. Tell them, hey, that's incorrect. You're not using the data correctly. So as an overriding note here throughout this entire presentation, it's going to be very tempting when you think of examples to think of politics, because politics as a whole is absolutely rife with logical fallacies. So it's very tempting to think about political and especially political ideology. I'm going to avoid that for this presentation. However, I do encourage you to apply what you've learned here to the world as a whole, including politics. So you, in your mind, I want you to be thinking about politics and thinking about any kind of organization of people, any kind of argument over data, what to do with it, how to proceed forward, and try and use the best data you can. Okay, but just for the sake of making sure we're all on the same page and that I don't have to go through lengthy proof processes, I'm going to avoid politics completely for these examples. So let's go ahead and get started. First one up is confirmation bias and anecdotal evidence. These two are related. They're technically two separate forms of fallacy, but they're very related and they are often integrated together in a single bad argument. So confirmation bias is seeking out only data that supports your own current belief or focusing on some small portion of data. This is also called selective perception. And the only thing different between confirmation bias and anecdotal evidence is that confirmation bias means you're seeking out to support something you already believe in, whereas anecdotal means you believe a very small data sample size, whether it's for or against you, right? So let's look at an example. This is a really famous classic one. It comes from a song called The Boxer, and it's by Paul Simon, and it says that a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. So basically what that means is you're hearing lots of things, but you're only listening to what you want to hear. So some other examples of this is if we make our game and we play test it and we have one play tester play through and the play tester goes, perfect, I love it. We say, stop, perfect. The game is perfect, let's move on. Well, is it? And let's take a step back. Who is this tester? Oh, it was our mom. Or it was a best friend. Or it was someone on another team at the same studio who we're friends with, right? So, okay, well, it's probably likely that those people who are close to us, mom, best friend, teammate, is going to have a favorable view based on personal opinion, not on fact. And we're only looking at one person. If we're wanting to make a game that's going to sell millions, we're going to need a lot more evidence than that. So this is a really common thing in the game industry, is to look at a very small sample size and then draw huge conclusions. We got one bad review for our game. Oh, we're doomed. Well, probably not. We'll see. We need more samples, and we need to get more opinions on this. Or let's do a test of people, but before we let them test our game, we're going to screen them to make sure they're the right kind of people to test our game. That's confirmation bias, and we don't want that. We want to get Our target audience, maybe, but not just people pre-screened that are selected to give us the results we want. We want to occasionally get surprising results, or else testing is a waste of time if we only get the answers that we know we want. So avoiding this. The easiest way to avoid confirmation bias and anecdotal evidence is get more data. And then look at the data as a whole. Look at patterns. Look at averages, median, mode, mean, those kinds of things. Instead of looking at just the sample sizes that speak most loudly or reinforce what you already believe. So try and find things that go against what you already believe. And then see, are they statistically significant? Correlation versus causation. This one is a really huge subject. And this just is the definition is that you think all correlation is causative. So if two things happen at the same time, they must be related. One must cause the other. So for example, and this is true, ice cream sales and the occurrence of sunburn both rise in the summer. Therefore, ice cream causes sunburns. Logically, you can make an argument for that, right? They both go up. If we look at the statistics, we can get millions of data samples on this, billions even, from around the world of everyone who eats ice cream and everyone who gets sunburn. And look, they often occur at similar times, or at least the same, in the same patterns of going up and down. Now, what's the problem with this? I mean, for this one, it's pretty obvious. The problem is that we know there's a third factor here, that being summer, that's actually causing both. When it's warm out, ice cream sales go up, and so does sunburn. Pretty logical, pretty easy. But there's a lot more to it than that when we get into deeper examples, especially in data. So I'm going to take another example that I think illustrates this. So let's say Adam is a level designer, and we've had a bunch of our levels tested, and all of our testers, we've done a good job. We've gotten hundreds of testers, and we've gotten feedback from them. It's well-written survey, and the results came back. Every level that Adam controls, that he owns, is rated as too difficult, too confusing, too hard. Okay, so one might jump to the conclusion then, Adam makes levels too hard, too difficult, too confusing, right? Seems possible. Those things both line up. All of his levels, all too hard. Well, what else could be going on? Again, this is another one where an outside influence could be in. Let's say, contrarily, that Adam is an expert in actuality, Adam is an expert at making levels easier. So when we did our tests, every level that was too hard, we assigned to Adam. Okay, well, that's very different then, isn't it? It would appear if you just looked at the data that Adam makes things too hard, when in fact the exact opposite is the case. Another possible solution, what if Adam had all the levels at the end of the game? Or what if he had the bonus challenge levels, right? Okay, so maybe we want the bonus challenge levels to be too hard. Or what if Adam had hard mode, right? So any of those things could possibly explain why all of Adam's levels were considered too hard, even though the causation of Adam makes levels too hard is not true. So there's lots of these. Superstitions are almost all based on these. Of don't step under a ladder, don't pass the path of a black cat. All those silly things came from correlation causation. Someone, and then tied in really with anecdotal evidence. So someone saw a black cat cross the path, something bad happened, and they assumed that the black cat made the bad thing happen. They anecdotally pulled out that evidence and ignored all the hundreds or thousands of times they'd seen a black cat with nothing bad happening, and made the correlation causation fallacy. Straw man argument. So this is arguing against something that's not present as a data point. And this seems like a weird thing to do, but it actually happens all the time. And the reason it gets his name as a straw man is if you were going to fight an army, like you had an army, right, of guys with swords and spears and shields, and you're going to go off to war, would you want to fight another army who is similarly equipped and well trained? Or would you want to fight an army of scarecrows that just stand there and are stuffed full of straw? Right? Well, your chance of success of beating the straw men is going to be 100% because they don't fight back. Right? They're not real. Whereas your chance of defeating another army would be significantly less. So you would want to fight the army of straw men. And that's why it's called a straw man argument, is because you build an artificial argument in this case instead of taking on the real argument. So let's look at an example. Adam wants to add a destroyed vehicle prop to his level. Okay, seems pretty benign. Bob says we should not turn our game into a racing game. Now hold on, Bob. No one said that. Yes, I get it that cars, vehicles, and racing games have some kind of relationship, but that's not what Adam wanted. So there's probably something else going on here with Bob, that he didn't want the vehicle, but it's hard to argue against a simple prop addition. So he's making a big grandiose argument that's not real, that's easy for him to tack. Turning our game into a racing game. Right? That's huge. That's a huge scopy thing. We can't possibly do that. But that's not actually what was being asked. This happens in politics all the time. I would give you an example, but I don't need to. Go read the news right now, any news, and you will find an example of this all over the place, of politicians back and forth accusing each other of, oh, you want to do this. No, they didn't say that. But what they did say was probably somewhat common sense, and maybe a little bit more middle of the road than they're given credit for. But when you attack them on an extreme stance, even if they don't present that, it's much easier to attack. So this happens all the time. Circular logic. This is an argument that proves itself and can't be proven without itself. Even that statement is circular logic and doesn't make much sense. But again, this happens an awful lot. So let's look at an example. Creative director says the new flashlight mechanic is genius because he made it and he knows genius when he sees it. Okay. So there's no real foundation to this data point. And the same goes very much for any situation where you have a book and a speaker, and the speaker is saying, what I'm saying is right because it's in the book, and the book is saying this is correct because the speaker said it, right? So think of any situation where that happens, and that's circular logic. Another one is a lot of scams, a lot of internet scams, and like get-rich-quick schemes are based on circular logic. You'll get rich because it's the best system ever. How do we know it? Because we know, right? Because we got rich quick. Therefore, we got rich quick. Therefore, it is the best system ever. It's the best system ever because we got rich quick, right? That's circular logic. You need some outside influence to prove why it is the best system ever and why you got rich quick, not just that one led to the other, which led to the other. Ad hominem. This is a really nasty one and very common, especially amongst young people, children, but carries over into adult life, unfortunately, with some people, and is incredibly destructive. So this is attacking personal traits instead of the presented data. So saying things like, that tester's weird, just ignore him. Or, I don't like Adam, so no, he's not going to get the job. I don't like him, right? So that is, there's no logic to this at all. It doesn't add anything to an argument. It doesn't add anything to a debate. It usually derails the debate and very often returns another ad hominem, and then no one is talking about logic or moving forward anymore at all, and it's just devolved into a childish fight. So this is one I think that is really good to call out immediately. If someone says something like, you say, I think your level's too hard, and they say, you're a jerk, say, well, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way, but let's actually talk about the data. Right? Let's talk about the presented argument itself and not attacking personal traits. Even call them out and say that is an ad hominem. False compromise. So this is another one that you're going to see a lot in like sales tactics and schemes. So this is where one or both sides take an extreme view and then demand a halfway compromise. So I'm going to give you a really extreme example to illustrate a point first, and we'll talk about slightly more realistic ones after that. You want a puppy and I don't. We get a half a puppy. That is not a compromise. There are some things that you can't compromise on, and just taking something down the middle is not a true compromise. Another example of this is if you're applying for a job, and let's say you want to make $50,000 a year. You put on your application, I'm going to put down 100,000, and then I can compromise down to 50 because that's what I really wanted. So that is taking a rather an extreme view of double what you actually want, and then falsely compromising down to the correct data point. And this can be really destructive in that situation in particular, because if you put something that ridiculous on an application, you're likely just to get passed over and never even get an interview to get to your compromise. Another famous example of this is in the classic Star Trek. Scotty, the engineer, saying, I need more time, and he always doesn't need more time. He always gets it done faster than he says. He false compromises all the time. And unfortunately, naive Captain Kirk falls for it every single time. He's like, I'll get you all the time I can. And then he ends up looking like the hero because he's been lying and false compromising. And so we should avoid that and be more realistic. And then also, again, if you notice this happening, that you have a producer says, oh, we can only give you this trivial amount of money for your project. Can you get it done then? Say, no, just no. We're not going to compromise. We're not going to work towards it. We're going to say that's a bad starting point. Let's start over, and not a compromise. The fallacy. Okay, because there's one flaw in the system, we're going to assume the whole system is flawed and must be disregarded. So in this picture, we see one tile is out of place. So we're going to rip up the entire floor, maybe burn down the entire house, because there's something wrong with it. That's obviously a very destructive methodology. So another good example is Aristotle thought the world was flat. So we should ignore everything Aristotle said. Well, no. Is the world flat? No. No, it is not. Aristotle was wrong. That's fine. He was wrong on several things. He lived 2,500 years ago. We've had a few advancements since then. We've learned some things. But that doesn't mean that everything Aristotle said was wrong. Lots of stuff he said applies to this day. Some of the stuff he wrote about writing and poetry and philosophy still is completely relevant to this day. It just means you have to be choosy about all data. You don't accept data sets incomplete or in none. So another place where this will rear its ugly head, the fallacy, is if someone writes up a proposal for a game and you notice a few typos, you don't throw it out. You say, you need to fix these typos, right? Because you want to fix the fallacy. If Aristotle was around today, I would ask that he reconsider the flatness of the earth, and he probably would. But in our example of a level design document, we don't throw out the entire thing because of a couple of typos. Similarly, if we're playing through a game that you've made and there's a bug in it, we don't say throw out the game. We say fix the bug, right? So you don't talk about the thing in total, you talk about the very specific issue. And this one you'll get sometimes maybe with a friend or a partner, and you say what's wrong, and they go, oh, everything. That's kind of a fallacy. No, obviously not everything is wrong. The breathing, so that's going right. But something's gone wrong. And so the feeling is, if something's gone wrong, everything is wrong. And as usually you want to say, can we get more specific on this and drill down to the real issue? Because I can't cover everything, right? Tu quoque. So this one is particularly destructive in teams, in partnerships, in relationships, with groups in politics, and with groups of friends or coworkers. Tu quoque is incredibly destructive, and one of the things that I think will lead to the destruction of relationships amongst people the fastest. no matter what kind of relationship that is. And this is answering a criticism with a criticism instead of an actual logical defense. So, for an example, I know I'm late. You broke my lamp last week. Well, okay. I see you still have some feelings about the broken lamp. That's a separate subject. We can talk about that separately. Being late is different. So, yes, they may have absolutely broken your lamp, and that's bad, right? But that has nothing to do with your lateness unless you're out buying a new lamp. And we see this all the time. I'll play test your game, you play test my game. We'll give each other notes. Okay, so I finished play testing your game, and I say, your game was too hard, and it was confusing. I didn't have good player direction. I didn't know what to do. I was lost. And you reply, oh, I don't care because your game's too easy and mindless and dumb. So I'm not going to change anything, right? So those are two different data sets, two different arguments. Both of us may be right. It is totally possible your game is too hard and my game is too easy, but getting lost and criticizing someone else doesn't add to or help with the argument. It simply derails it and turns it into a nasty, hurt people's feelings, more information than we can cover kind of argument. So it's important to avoid those. And again, call people out with these. If someone answers a criticism, they ask you for feedback, you give it to them, and they say, you're a jerk, what would you know? You're always late. And say, well, let's stop. Let's look and address the data points one at a time and logically. The gambler's fallacy. So this one's interesting. Past random results can affect future results. No, they can't. Man, I wish people knew this one more. Vegas would not exist in the format it does if people understood this. So let's look at an example. We're going to dig in a little bit more on this one because this one is very near and dear to my heart. So I've rolled ones 5 times in a row. Therefore, there's a smaller chance I will roll a 1 this time because the odds of rolling a 1 6 times in a row are 46,656 to 1. No, that is not the case. So if I've rolled a 1 5 times in a row, assuming that the dice is good, that means I've already beaten all of those odds. That is in the past. Nothing in the past affects the future at all. Those odds are beat. So let's take a simpler example. The odds of rolling 2 1s, a 1 and a 1, on 2 6-sided dice is 1 in 36. Now if I roll a 1, I've already beat 1/6 of those odds. I've already made it. So that's cleared out. So now my odds of rolling a 1 on the next die are 1 in 6, as they would be. So combine the two, 1 in 36 in total in the past when it's done and we evaluate it. Currently, whatever odds I've already beat are gone and don't count, and only the odds in the future are what matter. False binary choice and loaded questions. So presenting a choice of 2 options when in reality there are many more, or pushing your audience to an answer with a pointed question or a loaded question that presents leading or false information. So let's look at a few examples. This is a really good example that you'll see. This is starting to pop up a lot. It's kind of timely information, so I want everybody to be aware of this one. You'll see these little surveys, these informal surveys over on Facebook, where they say, do thumbs up for this and angry face for that, right? And we're just going to say option A and option B right now. So right here on the surface, we haven't even picked a subject yet, just option A and option B. There's already a problem. There's a few problems here. One, what if there are more than 2 choices? What if there are many choices? What if there's a choice halfway in between? Right? So there aren't options for that. You're forcing me into picking one of 2 when potentially there are many, many choices. And secondly, it's a loaded question because what's the default option when you click to interact on Facebook? It's the thumbs up. So by default, with people clicking if they're not paying attention, which is very, very common on Facebook, or they have fumble fingers, they're going to pick the thumbs up way more than the angry face. And we don't even have a subject here. Next up is the connotation. Thumbs up generally signifies positive, encouraging, something we like, something we want, and angry face is just the opposite of that. So if it was thumbs up for cats and angry face for dogs, we've already loaded it. And it's saying, cats are thumbs up and dogs are angry face and negative and bad, and cats are positive and good. And what if I don't like either? Or what if I like both? Or what if I like turtles, right? Those options aren't presented, so this is a false binary choice and loaded questions. This happens all the time, and I would encourage you to review and revise any test questions you have when you're doing your game testing to make sure they aren't false binary or loaded questions. Questions like, how much do you love our new feature? Is a loaded question. Or, should we cut half the levels in the game? That's a false binary. Maybe you should only cut one. Maybe you should add, right? There's other options that you're not presenting. So review all of your questions when you write your survey questions for your testers, which is a very common thing we do. And make sure that you're giving them all the options that they need and that you're not giving away the answers you want for the questions in your question. Emotional fallacy. So using emotion as a guide instead of data. This is another really common one, and it very often comes down to fear. Fear is a really big guiding problem in emotional fallacy, in particular with our children. And you can look at examples. You can actually go online and look up what are the things that parents are most afraid of, and then you can look up separately what are the dangers that are most. What are the things that are most dangerous to children? And those lists have very little matching on them, unfortunately. The list of what are actual dangers to our children is pretty benign stuff. Wear your seatbelts, don't touch and drive, wear bike helmets, stay away from the pool at night, things like that. Pretty simple. But the emotion gets people worked up. So let's talk a little bit about that with another example. Airplanes are scary. It's safer to drive cross country. Well, sorry, no, it's not. You may be afraid of airplanes. I'm not going to argue with you about that. That's your personal opinion, and that's totally valid. You may like to drive cross country better, especially in a nice classic Mercedes like we have here. That I get. It's a nice cruise, and you enjoy it. You see the sights. I get that. Nothing wrong with that. But we have to stop when you say it's safer to drive than fly. That simply is not true. We have a lot of data showing us that is simply not the case. And here's the thing, we don't even have to trust the data. We can go get the data again. If we feel that the data is untrustworthy and unmanipulated, we don't have to trust it. We can go out and do another survey. We can go out and do more studies and get more educated people to look at this and get us real data. It's easy to fall into the trap of feeling like, oh, I saw this thing on the news, it was terrifying and scary, therefore it's a real danger, right? But no, what is terrifying, what is emotional is not necessarily true. Another good example that we can use in our industry is if something makes you laugh and you think it's hilarious, but it's a joke that only people on the team get, because it's about somebody on the team, and it's hilarious because you know him and it's funny, and every time you see it in the game you think it's great, but that doesn't mean it's a good argument for you to put in the game. Probably it is not. So you need to not rely on the emotion of why you want, in this example, being happy and think something's funny because you get an in-joke. Instead, you need to look at data. Do our players get it? Does it add to the game? Or does it distract from the game? Because maybe it's annoying to people who don't get the in-joke, right? So we need to look further than just our emotion. Slippery slope. So this says you can't budge or compromise in the slightest, lest your opponent will inevitably ask for more, right? And this is another real common one. In fact, quite annoying. People will call themselves out on this and use this fallacy as the basis of their argument. They'll say, whoa, 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 slippery slope, can't do that. And like, no, that is a logical fallacy. Just because someone has asked for a small raise does not mean they want a huge raise. Sometimes they just want a small raise. So let's look at some examples. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile. This is unfortunately one that us in education fall into, and we have to constantly check ourselves. You let a student turn in something 1 minute late, next thing you know, they're not going to turn it in for months, and you got to deal with that. No, that's not the case. If there's extraordinary extenuating circumstances and the student is 1 minute late, we should not fall down the slippery slope of thinking that they'll just take advantage, right? And this goes with so many things, and I'm sure you've already thought of some examples in politics where we can apply this, where like, nope, can't let them have that. They'll just ask for more and more and more. So no, that's not the case. You have to look at what is being asked, what is being delivered on the face value of it for itself, not on some made-up potential of what it may become someday. Personal incredulity. So this is rejecting an idea or an argument because you don't personally understand it. And it seems like this would be a weird thing to do, and yet it happens all the time with some really big, really important subjects in our world currently. So let's look at an example. Atomic physics is way too complicated to be real. This seems ridiculous, but there was a time very recently within the lives of people who are around today that when they were in school, they were taught, do you believe in atoms? Because not everybody does. Even though it was clearly proven, and has been for quite some time, that atomic physics are indeed real. But if they don't believe it, because it seems too complicated, they can't understand it, can't wrap their brain around it, then they're going to say, no, it's not real. So how does this apply to us in games? So very commonly, an engineer, often, but sometimes a designer, system designers in particular, will make this beautiful big system of complex inner workings and data and code or some other form of logic, and it's beautiful, and will present it to someone who maybe is not as our technical equivalent, let's say a producer, to pick on producers, and they don't get it, and so they say, I don't understand this, so no, don't add it. I'm like, well, why would a producer understand a new rendering engine or a better memory management system for low-level code on our target hardware? It doesn't make sense that they would. But rejecting something because you don't understand it is ludicrous. Don't do that. That's not what higher education is about at all. So watch this. And if you feel yourself wanting to reject an idea, think about it. Am I rejecting this idea because the idea is bad, or am I rejecting it because I don't understand it? Very important distinction. And also, be sure to call people out on this one too. Say, are you rejecting this because you don't understand it? Or are you rejecting it because you do understand it? And even if you need to test someone who rejects an idea. Like, why are you rejecting it? Are you sure you understand it thoroughly enough to reject it? Relative privation. So somebody else has it better or worse, so that has an effect on you. It doesn't. What has an effect on your argument and your statements should have nothing to do than a best or worst case scenario. So we know a very classic example that I assume pretty much everybody's heard at this point. There's starving kids in the world, so be happy with this junk I gave you. I personally hate broccoli, so this is my nemesis. And no, sorry, I don't care if there's starving kids in the world. That's not going to make me eat broccoli. I'm sorry for the starving kids, and maybe they can have my broccoli because I'm not going to eat it. Sorry, you're not going to argue with that. So how does this relate to the game industry? A very good example, and this might, unfortunately, will likely happen to you out in the industry, is a producer or manager or someone will come to you, lead, and say, we need you to do 80-hour weeks. Your salary, so you're not going to be getting paid for it, or you're going to be working 80 hours a week, but you should be thankful you're working 80-hour weeks because did you hear about that studio that just had the layoffs? Yeah, that could have been you. So be thankful. No, don't be thankful just because someone else somewhere has it worse. Someone else somewhere else always has it worse or better. The opposite would be, I get paid well and I'm happy at my job, but I have a friend, he lives in San Francisco and he gets paid better than me. So my job's terrible and I hate the people I work for and I'm going to be jerks to them. Right? No, you can't. You can never compare your situation to an ideal. If you're getting paid or properly for your position and where you're at in the country, then you should be thankful for that in and of itself, and not think I'm doing better than someone, so I'm doing better, or worse than someone, so I'm doing bad. Right? Take the data as it is. And this goes for a lot more things than just money. This can go for any kind of circumstance. Okay, I know our game has a lot of bugs, but man, I've seen other games that are shipped with tons of bugs. Doesn't mean it's acceptable for you to ship a game with bugs. It absolutely is not. But yeah, don't compare yourself to some other, especially idealized, whether it be good or bad. The sharpshooter fallacy. So this is a great one. It's changing your stance to fit the outcome and avoid being wrong. Now, there is a particular note on this one. It is good to change your stance based on data. That is a good thing. But don't claim you were right all along. That's where the fallacy came in. If you see, here's the data, what we presumed was incorrect, this new assumption should be correct because of the data, then yes, I have changed my mind based on the data. That is a great thing. More people should do that. But what you shouldn't do is say, yeah, I knew it was like that. And let's give an example where this happens in the game industry all the time. It's not a bug, it's a feature. No, it's a bug. Own up to it, claim it, you know it's a bug. Now, if it can be spun into a feature, if it gives you an idea, that's fine. But don't say, well, yeah, I know the player was struggling with that key and lock puzzle for like 5 minutes straight and was lost and confused, but that's what I was wanting. That's what I wanted. That was really the vibe I wanted, was lost and confused and stumbling around for 5 minutes straight. No, it wasn't. That's a sharpshooter fallacy. You're making up an answer. What you should do is, before it's tested, say, what is the feeling you want in this room? I want the player to find the key and then figure out how to use the special lock and be out in 30 seconds. All right, and then check the data. Does it match what you wanted? If not, no, then it's broken. Right? So fix it. Burden of proof. So this is telling your audience that they have to prove you wrong. And boy, does this one happen all the time too. Oh yeah, prove me wrong. Right? So let's look at a really funny example, I think. Bruce Lee can beat Mike Tyson in a fight. Prove me wrong. Bet you can't. Well, of course you can't. Bruce Lee's dead and Mike Tyson's retired. So obviously you can't prove him wrong. And that's not an argument at all. That's a silly hypothetical. This go into any comic book store, anywhere, hang around for a few minutes and you're going to hear one of these. But this also happens in more practical applications too, right? So not just silly fanboyism, but there's lots of practical burden of proof arguments. So let's say we want to add a flashlight mechanic. Well, I think it's a bad idea. If we don't add this flashlight mechanic, the game will be ruined, and it won't sell any copies, and we'll all get laid off. Prove me wrong. Well, obviously the only way we could do that is to build two teams identically. One adds a flashlight mechanic, the other doesn't, and we see which one gets laid off, right? That's not realistic, not even possible. So when someone says something like that, you need to make sure and call them out and say that can't be proven or disproven, therefore is not admissible as data or evidence for anything. Even worse are these burden of proof arguments that are retroactive. So you say, well, we didn't hire my buddy for the team, and if we would have hired him, the game would come out so much better. I guarantee it. Like, well, you can't guarantee that because you can't go back in time and find out if it would have happened. So again, that's a good time to let someone know, like, that can't be proven. that can't be proven or disproven. So it really means nothing. You can think that, you can feel that. That's fine. Those are feelings and emotions, but they're not really relevant to an actual logical debate. So they should just be left to the side and left to the comic book shops and MMA forums where everybody can debate nonsense all they want. Bandwagon. So using popularity to replace the validity of data. All the cool kids are doing it. Yeah, don't be that cheap and follow along. Really great example of this one in the game industry is after the first God of War came out, everybody added in those cinematic push button mini game things. Like everybody. I was working on a game, which I will not name at this moment, that we were well into production, making a good game, action game, and management came to us and was like, this thing is blowing up. We got to add those push-button cinematic games in there. And we're like, no, it doesn't really fit our game. Like, oh no, everybody's doing it. Look at this game. It came out and it did it. And this game, it came out and it did it. So you got to do it. Like, no, that's not a valid argument. Just because other people have done it doesn't mean it's right. For the most of all of human history, people couldn't read and write, and they thought that was fine. That doesn't make illiteracy good. For the longest time in human history, most people thought the world was flat. That doesn't make it right. Sometimes going against the grain and being the outlier, if you base it on good data, is the correct way to go. We would never move forward if someone wasn't willing to step forward, right, and go against the grain, and go against the bandwagon. So, good one to avoid. Authority fallacy. So using your own or another person's position of authority to override good data. Let's talk about that. Because I'm your boss and I said it's right. No. Now, they can say, because I'm your boss and I don't care if it's right, do it anyway. Totally legit. In a standard working environment, you got to do what your boss says to within reason, and if they tell you put it in the game, put it in the game. That's how it is. Doesn't make it right. Some other examples of this. I had my game. It was almost done. I was at a convention. It was a GDC, and I saw a famous developer guy, and I had him test my game, and he said it was brilliant. So my game is brilliant. Well, there are a couple things going on here. One, authority fallacy. We're just taking famous guy and saying he has some kind of authority, and then we're doing anecdotal data. I'm only picking one example, right? So we need to have a lot of people test it. Another one is, well, our reviews are generally favorable. Our game's looking really good, but Kotaku hated it. And they're the authority on this kind of game. So really the game's terrible. No, not at all. That's not the case. Just because someone of importance says something is true doesn't make it true. The data needs to hold up on its own. And then appeal to novelty. So it's new, so it must be better, right? That's what all the commercials on TV tell you all the time. It's new. Check it out. It's new, right? It's better than everything else. That's not necessarily the case. And a classic example is when you get a new hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right? And this definitely feeds into us. You'll see this as a student too. You learn a new skill, and all of a sudden you want to apply that new skill to everything. You may have recently learned some data structures, some state machines, and now want to put state machines in everything. Maybe that's appropriate, but maybe not. So just because something is new and interesting doesn't necessarily mean it's the best job or the best tool for the job. And this is another easy one to call out. If someone has no other basis, just push them a little bit. Why should we add that? Well, it's new. It just came out. Okay, and why should we add that? Like I said, because it's new. Okay, well, let's stop there. That's a problem. Let's get some more data and some more true justification beyond it's new. And then we got the opposite. Just because something is accurate now does not mean it was Just because something was accurate in the past does not mean it is necessarily accurate now. This is also called the appeal to tradition. And while this has changed quite a bit for us in the game industry, it is most certainly not, we're not immune to it. And the world as a whole most certainly is not immune to this. And we see it all the time, with the classic example being, we do it that way because that's the way we do it. It's tradition. We've always done it that way. There needs to be better justification for doing anything beyond that's always the way we've done it. Now, if you dig deeper and you look at that's the way we've always done it, very oftentimes there are logical reasons of that's why we've always done it, because it actually makes sense logically. Even if that reasoning has been lost, you can regain that reasoning, and tradition is a great place to start a search. How have others done it? And this goes in the game industry too. If we want to make a new control scheme for our controller, for our game, starting with, well, how have others done it, is a perfectly valid way to start. But you don't say, this is the way other games have done it, so this is the way we must do it, right? Because if we got stuck in that kind of logic, the most successful games came out on 8-bit processor, so we should be doing 8-bit processor games. That's the way we've always done it, right? So, obviously we move along from that. But again, just like the appeal to novelty, the appeal to tradition, it's fine to have tradition. It very often is justified, but we need more information than just that. And there are many, many more. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. To get you thinking about logical fallacies, I recommend everyone watch this a couple times. And then I'm going to have the slides available for download as well, so you can go through it if you're more of a reader. There's a lot of really good resources out on the internet and in books and in libraries and whatnot that you can get on logical fallacies and how to use data correctly and how not to use data. So as we come to the close of this, I would say just think about what you've seen here, think critically, and then practice calling people out, including yourself, when you see someone performing one of these logical fallacies. And that's all. Thank you for your time.